Film school can be incredibly expensive, but the question remains, is it worth it? Well, folks, I graduated from film school in 2014, and 10 years later, I'm in a Super 8 motel in the middle of Florida. Thanks for watching.
Make a movie every week in Super 8 or high def, write every night, and every weekend shoot for 2 days and work with actors, work with a little 1,000 watt lighting kit, and get a response from the audience and see where it's slow and where it doesn't work and where your ideas weren't being communicated properly. And then go out and make another picture the next weekend and just keep doing it. Make films, no matter what anybody says, and you'll be a filmmaker.
What's up, beautiful people? I'm Zach, and you're watching Zach Makes Movies, the channel where we talk about...
You guessed it, Frank Stallone.
So I've spoken quite a bit about individual projects that I worked on while attending film school. Films like A Little Bit Crazy, Dark Side of the Moon, Who Dates in College. But I've had people ask me to speak on my experience at film school, and the topic that has come up again and again, one single question: is film school worth the money? Now, the easy answer is no. No, it's not worth the money. Definitely not. But it's a lot more complicated than that. So I wanted to break down what I would do differently if I were to go back in time. I went to the New York Film Academy in Los Angeles. It started in New York, and then they started branching out like, McDonald's. The one I attended was in Los Angeles, and the reason that I chose that one, we were promised access to the Universal Studios backlot, which was incredibly enticing for a 17-year-old film nerd. There were a few perks. We got to attend a screening of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds with a Q&A with the star, Tippi Hedren, who was in her 80s at that point. We also got to shoot what were called production workshops, which was basically our directing teacher would give us a very specific project. We would usually shoot these on 16mm film camera without sound. We were never really given an opportunity to be truly creative with what we were shooting back there. It was only a day at a time, and usually not even a full day. We did have fun shooting in the Western backlot. You can see the full 5-minute video on my Patreon. Highly recommend it, very fun. Getting back to the argument of whether film school in general is worth it, film school provides you with all of the basic information that you need to have going into the film industry. At the time, there was not quite as much information available online for free as there slowly began to be. I have a whole list of YouTube channels that I recommend to new filmmakers now, where you can learn everything I learned in film school and more. And so I highly recommend going that route at this point. But here's the thing. The piece of advice you might get from someone like Quentin Tarantino or Robert Rodriguez is to save the money that you were going to spend on film school and instead use it to make your first film. And that's not bad advice. I think that in many ways you'll learn all the same things on a film set as you would in film school. The difference being at the end, you'll have a movie, as opposed to a useless degree. The problem is, you can make a few films on your own before really knowing how to make a movie correctly. So I do think that ultimately at the end of the day, you end up pretty much in the same spot. The other big thing with film school is the networking aspect of it. You start your first day in film school, and you look around, and you start thinking, statistically, almost nobody here is going to make it. As much of a warm and fuzzy feeling as that gave me deep inside, you never want to be the most successful person in a group of people that you are spending money to be around so that you can be helped by the most successful person in the group. It's like being the person in the group project who's doing all the work. Let's say you don't make it traditionally. Let's say that you try your best out in the real world after film school for a few years and nothing's happening, but one of your friends does start to make it. It was just a numbers game. It's just a matter of time before someone you know starts to do well. And they can pull you up. They can put you on their team, whether you're a producer or whether you're a PA. Whatever you're doing, you'll be on those film sets. You'll be in direct contact with the person who could potentially help make your career. Now, if no one in your class is doing that at all, it becomes less worth it. And certain people that I invested thousands of hours in certain producing partnerships, writing partnerships, are no longer in the industry. The experience of working on a bunch of different film sets was incredibly beneficial. And most film schools aren't going to have that. So that's the one benefit I would say to my extremely hands-on film school. It was incredibly beneficial to have access to all of the film equipment that we otherwise would never have been able to afford. I was using the Red Epic camera in my last year that was hundreds of thousands of dollars. You hear a lot from the Mark Duplass's of the world who say famously that the cavalry is not coming. You're waiting as an independent filmmaker for someone to show up and swoop you up and say, hey, this is a bag of money right here, let me invest in this guy. We're all going to benefit from that. We're all going to succeed together. That doesn't happen. I mean, it very rarely happens. I've had opportunities over the years that if I had played my cards right, perhaps it would have gone in that direction, but I didn't, and I'll talk about those in another video. But the thing about networking that's so interesting is that, like I was saying, a few years ago I would have said that it was kind of a waste. However, the butterfly effect is an incredible thing. My first year in film school, I made a good friend, and that good friend introduced me to his good friend, and his good friend introduced me to his now wife, and his now wife introduced me to her brother. Her brother became my composer. He started working with another filmmaker. They ended up partnering up, and 10 years after graduating film school, I'm now working with that guy on much larger projects than I was working on a year ago. Ultimately, it may just pay off after all. Now, if I hadn't gone to film school and I had saved up all that money and I had spent it all to make a movie, that movie probably would have sucked and no one would have seen it because I wouldn't have known how to distribute it. I wouldn't have known how to market it. I wouldn't have known how to properly produce it. So I don't know if I would be in a better position in that case. However, I still believe, with all this information aside, I would recommend not going to film school. I would recommend saving your money, spending a couple of years studying absolutely every aspect of filmmaking that you are interested in and that you're not interested on YouTube. This is a list of my favorite YouTube channels that I recommend to young filmmakers. I highly recommend you check these out. Some of them are a little more defunct now, but there's still tons and tons of incredible information on there. I would start reading as many screenplays as I could possibly get my hands on. You can find a bunch of them online for free. I mean, almost any screenplay you can find online for free if you look hard enough. Watch as many movies as you possibly can. That's the obvious one. Watch films on mute. It's very helpful for cinematography. Save up some money, make a short film, and make a short film that is extremely contained. Make a short film that only takes place in one room or one house. Don't try to force a feature film into a short film. Just make a scene of a feature film. You know, that's the ideal scenario, would be to write a low budget feature film, take a scene from that feature film, 5 to 15 minute sequence that you think you can film on your own, and film that. And if it goes well, maybe you shoot another sequence. Maybe you shoot a feature film in pieces. One thing that I had done is I couldn't wrap my head around the possibility of being able to direct a feature all at once. So I wrote a horror anthology film, knowing that I could film it as 4 different short films. I got about halfway through that and then ran out of money and ended up jumping into a much, much cheaper feature film that I was able to shoot all at once. But all of this is separate from my film education. You know, if I had not gone to film school, I don't know how different things would have been. I don't think they would have been better, but if you're just going to put yourself in years and years of debt, it's probably not worth it. Whether you go to film school or not, you're still going to end up in a situation where you have to make a movie afterwards, and that movie's probably not going to do particularly well, and then you're going to have to make the decision of whether you're going to do it again. And each time you make that decision is your re-up on your personal contract of whether or not you are a filmmaker. whether you went to film school or not, if you're making movies, you make movies. So I can't tell you whether or not film school was worth it for me until I truly crossed the finish line on this journey. Right now, I'm working on more projects than I've ever worked before. Right now, I have more prospects than I've ever had before. And all of this has come within the last 6 to 12 months. And it's all come from networking and honing my craft. Now, networking doesn't do anything for you if you're not constantly honing your craft. That can be accomplished whether you go to film school or not. You look at someone like Sam Raimi. You know, it wasn't film school that got him to make Evil Dead. He knew other young lunatics who wanted to make the kinds of movies he wanted to make when he was in high school. So, if you're on the fence right now about going to film school, number one, I would say choose that film school very, very carefully and factor in what kind of professors you're going to have there. Now, in terms of my experience with my professors in film school, some were better than others, as is the case anywhere. One of my teachers was an AD on the A-Team series, assistant director, back in the 80s. Then we would have a teacher who had directed a feature film, but it had been several years, and he was in the process of trying to pitch another movie. So through those experiences, we'd get to live vicariously and watch one of our professors doing exactly what we would be doing once we graduated. And you'd get to hear some crazy stories and celebrities that he was getting in touch with and actors that he was getting lined up to be in his project and different things that would happen that would get in the way of that. We also had an experience with a teacher there, a self-described failure in the industry. We were taking a class called Acting for Directors, which I think is a great class to take. If you want to be a director, you should have some basic acting knowledge. If nothing else, just to see what actors are actually going through with their Meisner nonsense bullshit techniques. This particular teacher, on our first day of Acting for Directors class, gave us this whole monologue that he tried to be an actor and failed. Then he tried to be a director and failed. And he tried to teach directing and failed. Then he tried to teach acting and failed. So welcome to Acting for Directors. That was his actual opening speech to us. That class was not great. And then the next semester, we found out that that guy was going to be teaching us directing. So a couple of my fellow classmates and I led the charge to try to get him replaced with a better directing teacher who hadn't admitted to us that he was a massive failure, specifically in teaching directing. And this is what we were paying for. We were all directing students. So it would have been an absolute joke to have that guy teach us. Ultimately, they decided that they couldn't fire the teacher before we even had one of his classes. They had to sit in. This guy's just teaching us off of a PowerPoint. And the next day, they had replaced him with this hard-ass guy who worked on the A-Team. It was kind of a funny dynamic. He came into it knowing that we had just gotten our previous teacher fired. I've got a lot of stories with with those professors there, but we can save those for another time. For the most part, I enjoyed my experience there. It was a lot of fun. By the time we graduated, I had learned a lot about how to make a short film. Didn't learn quite as much about how to actually navigate the film industry. What was recommended to us after we graduated, we were kind of, thrown to the wolves at that point. But in some ways, that's kind of what we needed, because it is a sink or swim industry, and ultimately what decides who's going to make it and who's not is who learns to tread water when you're tossed in with the sharks. And that is my mixed metaphor for the day. So ultimately, my answer is complicated. I personally would not recommend film school. But at the same time, I am acknowledging the fact that I may ultimately greatly benefit from the networking that I did at that film school, while simultaneously and consistently benefiting from the lessons I learned, the knowledge I acquired from some of those teachers, and the on-set experience that I got from going to that particular school. So at the end of the day, it's up to you. You have to make that decision for yourself. But I think the more important question is whether you go to film school or not. After that's all said and done, are you going to keep going? Because that's what's going to ultimately decide whether or not you make it as a filmmaker. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe, and if you have any other topics that you recommend, this topic was recommended by this person right here. If you have any specific questions about film school, I'd be happy to make another video. But otherwise, see you next time.